How many times a week should you train in order to build muscle? Should it be twice a week, 3 times a week, 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week? What is the ideal interval in order to get consistent gains? There really isn't necessarily a firm right or wrong answer for this, but there is one rule that will determine what your results will be. So adherence to this rule will pretty much guarantee your results, and breaking the rule will do the opposite. So what I did was I decided to put together a visual representation of what the journey looks like and what it looks like to follow the rule and what it looks like to not follow the rule. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and show you that visual representation in the form of this graph. Here on the whiteboard, we got 3 lines. This top line here, this red line, is the max fatigue line. This is the maximum amount of fatigue you can accumulate within your training cycle before your training starts backfiring against you. This horizontal line, or diagonal line, I should say, is the progressive overload, right? This beautiful blue line, this is a representation of progressive overload, or the gradual increase in difficulty and the challenge that your training will provide you. All right, so this can be the gradual increase in the amount of reps you do, the amount of sets you do, the amount of weight you use, whatever the case is, doesn't particularly matter. The bottom line is full recovery. This is the best starting position that you can have when pursuing your training. This is where your nervous system is optimal in its capacity for function. This is where you have full muscle glycogen storage. This is where you have minimal to no muscular damage. This is where you have the maximum amount of mental and emotional stability and mental focus to really concentrate and be dialed in during the training. Okay, so this is what it will look like. Now, it works this way on a weekly basis, monthly basis, quarterly basis, an annual basis. Pretty much this is going to be the visual representation of what that looks like. Now, every training session will give you a touch point on the progressive overload line. Oh, this says overlead instead of overload. I just caught that typo. Hold on a second. That's supposed to be OAD. Okay. So each training session is going to provide you a touch point. So for example, your first training session will be here. Boom. It's going to give you your first touch point. And you come back down to recovery. Okay. Second touch point for the second workout. Back to recovery. Third workout. And then back to recovery. Right? It's more or less what that looks like. Now, it's important to really manage how close you get to this max fatigue line and when, and how much time you spend away from this full recovery line. Because what this can look like too is, because keep in mind, progressive overload will eventually lead you into max fatigue where your training tops off, which means your training is no longer going to benefit you as far as muscle growth and strength, right? Your training is not going to produce any more results because you're already capped out at that max fatigue line. That progressive overload line is not going to pass the max fatigue line. So it's important to understand that. So let's say you get a workout, boom, second touch point, third touch point, fourth touch point, fifth touch point. Once you're at here, there's no more progress to be had. What you got to do is you got to come all the way down to full recovery. So when you get your touch points, boom, 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 you come all the way down to full recovery and back to the beginning to repeat. So you get like cycles within cycles. So for example, let's say it's a 12-week cycle. So you need 12 touch points on the progressive overload line, right? So you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 till you get to the max fatigue line. You come all the way back to full recovery and start again. Same thing on a weekly, right? You train Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So you get Monday touch point, Wednesday touch point, Friday touch point, go back to full recovery and reset. You take Saturday and Sunday for a recovery weekend to come all the way back to full recovery and sit back for Monday. It's like the easiest way to understand this, right? So we got Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and boom, back down, right? You don't always make it back to full recovery after every training session. It'd be ideal if it worked that way, but a lot of the times it doesn't. That's fine. The more aggressive you are in your training, one thing you have to be mindful of is you shorten the cycle. So the more ambitious you are towards progressive overload, this will end you up looking something like this here. It makes progressive overload a lot steeper, which means you hit the max fatigue line a lot faster. The reason why this is important is because that really aggressive form of pursuing progressive overload will cause you to hit max fatigue a lot quicker, and then basically there's no more results. You're training flat, right? So you go from hitting touch points on progressive overload to then hitting touch points on max fatigue, where essentially there's no more growth, there's no more strength increases here. Okay, it's flat. And then eventually what happens is you capitulate. Either you get injured, or you just lose your motivation, or you just progressively get weaker over time, which means that your max effort is actually not meeting your previous record highs that you had on the progressive overload cycle. So it feels like a max effort, but it's not really your max effort, it's just max fatigue. And eventually you're going to have to capitulate and come back down here to the full recovery zone to start back over with the cycle. Now, the reason why this is important to understand is because this is not a matter of hard work, it's a matter of strategy. You have to know where you are, how close you are to max fatigue, and how close you are to full recovery. There's another thing I want to show you, because there's a curve in the line. So this line, let's say we make this line, let's say we make it like a magenta. Okay. So we got a bit of a curved line. So the curved line, let's say the curved line will start here and end here at progressive overload. And the curved line has a bend in it. So your results will look a little something like this. All right. So that progressive overload can be linear, but a lot of your results you get up front. All right. A lot of your results you get up front. So you get some of your most results like up here. Okay. Now, if you're really aggressive up front, you get, it looks a little something like this. Okay. This is the maximum in terms of weight lifted, reps done, and all of that type of stuff. This is your maximum capacity. This is what your progress looks like, this magenta line here. So if you follow progressive overload, these are the gains that are a result of that. But now notice the curve starts to flatten out the closer you get to max fatigue. So it could even look a little something like this. A second. Yeah, let's get to here and let's do this. So yeah, it could look a little something like this here. Big gains up front, and then the gains really start to narrow out towards the end of the training cycle. Right? And that depends on how long your training cycle would be. The bend in that line will be a little bit more even. Okay? But to one degree or another, this is going to be your results. This purple line here, this magenta line, and then the blue line is progressive overload, and the red line is max fatigue. Now, if you notice, this purple line here does not cross max fatigue. Max fatigue is the ceiling. You don't get results past max fatigue. When you try to get results past max fatigue, this is where injury happens. This is where you get overuse injuries, tennis elbow, golfer's elbow, AC impingements, knee issues, right? All types of nastiness going on there, loss of motivation, difficulty sleeping. You start to break down as you get closer to max fatigue. And that's why you have to understand where you are. When your joints are hurting a little bit more than usual, it's much harder to get out of bed. You feel like you're gaining body fat at a faster rate. You're more irritable. You have less mental and emotional stability, more brain fog than normal. That's a sign you're a little too close to max fatigue, and you got to back off and really start prioritizing making your way back to full recovery. And then repeat the cycle. That's essentially what your training cycle looks like right here. And it's very important to know where you are in that cycle and how many touch points you have on this progressive overload. Because the more touch points you have, the closer you get to max fatigue. Now, for me personally in my journey, especially very early on in my journey, I've been able to have pretty good progress as far as building muscle mass and strength and all of that. But what came along with it was a lot of mental and emotional stress, poor sleep, excessive napping, increase in seasonal allergies, pretty much joint pain and injuries to every joint in my body, lower back, shoulders, neck, elbows, knees, ankles, even things like plantar fasciitis in my left foot. A lot of different things. My body was really starting to break down because of how ambitious I was towards the training in order to build, this strength and muscle mass. And I also ended up running into this issue where in order to really push past max fatigue, I figured, well, you know what? I can take more naps and I can eat more food. But what happened was this just made me gain excessive amount of body fat. And eventually it even caused me to get weaker, where I had to back off. And I had to back off of training sometimes for a week or even 2 weeks because I just couldn't train anymore. It just hurt too much to do so. And that's what that is. What I did was I started implementing some regulations in my training, and your regulations can look different for you as an individual, right? These are fairly arbitrary regulations. But what I found to work pretty well is every training session is a max effort training session, but I don't have many training sessions within the week. It may just be 2 or 3 training sessions. I don't do many sets, right? I may do 3 sets a week per muscle group, as opposed to like 10 or 16 or whatever the case is. Now you can grow from 10 or 16 sets, but just understand the sets that you mainly benefit from are typically going to be your last or your last 2 sets. So if you're doing 5 sets, the ones that you particularly benefit from are going to be sets 4 and 5. All the other sets before that are just like a warm-up or so. So it's just making your workouts take longer to get through. That's really it. But the last set, that is the most challenging set, that's the set that actually counts. That is that max effort set. So for me, I'm like, hey, if I can really achieve that progressive overload and get that most beneficial set, I can get that work done in 1 set, 2 or even 3 sets a week, then why would I do 5, 10, or 16? So 1 set per exercise per muscle group. So what that looks like is typically like around 2 or 3 exercises per muscle group per week. All right, so that's a rule that I establish. So for example, if I'm training chest, I may have 2 or 3 exercises for chest. Now, one would be an isolation exercise, maybe like a chest fly, pec deck, or something like this. And then I'll have more of a compound movement, like a push-up or a chest press or something along these lines. It's typically just going to be 2, all right? If I'm in the gym training, it would be something like barbell bench press and like pec deck. If I'm training with resistance bands outside, it would probably be push-ups and dips, maybe push-ups on a decline and banded dips, something like this. For back training, it's going to be pull-ups, chin-ups, or lat pull-downs and some type of row variation. For shoulders, it's either going to be an upright row or lateral raise and then an overhead press. For hamstrings, it's going to be a leg curl and some type of deadlifting movement focused on stretching the hamstrings. All right, so leg curls is for isolating the hamstrings and focus mainly on shortening the hamstring. And then a deadlift is going to be more of a compound movement for lengthening the hamstring and having the hamstring work in assistance with the glutes to extend the hips. Basically, every muscle that you have in your body does like 2 joint actions. Okay, so you really only need about 2, 3 at the most as far as exercises per muscle group. Real simple. Simplicity sometimes, or most of the time, is like the best thing you can do, right? And all of my training, I try to get it done within 60 to 90 minutes a week. And this is a way where I can pretty much prevent hitting that max fatigue line and spending too much time around that max fatigue line. It allows me to get away from the max fatigue line and get closer to full recovery because I am reducing excess training exposure. It's preventing me from just doing too much. The less time I spend training, the more time I can spend recovering. So one of the benefits of minimizing and doing less volume is the fact that, you can't really be doing much overtraining. You don't train that much in the first place. Most of your week is going to be recovery. So, 7 days out of the week, you're only training 2 or 3 days out of that week. You have the other 4 days of recovery. It's a pretty good ratio if you want to prioritize recovery, which basically the importance of recovery is the fact that you only grow from what you recover from. So if there's no emphasis on recovery, there's no emphasis on the growth itself. It doesn't take a whole lot to build muscle mass. Basically, to build muscle mass and strength requires a very strong stimulation. Okay, a very powerful stimulus. You can train the muscle and train that movement pattern so hard that it signals to your brain, hey, we got to reinforce this. We got to get ready for the next time this happens. But it doesn't have to be this long-winded, excessive, and constant repeated stimulus, because then you create numbness, you create a resistance to it, right? It would be the equivalent of if I had the gain turned up excessively on this microphone and I had the microphone like in my mouth saying all the stuff I'm saying now. It's like, all right, back off the mic. We get it. We understand. You don't need it. You don't need it to be that loud and that aggressive. It's like that. You produce the stimulus and then you let your body do the rest as you recover. It's really that simple, right? So more sets and more reps and more training days is not really necessary because the only thing that really matters is how well you're following that progressive overload line and how much time you're spending around that max fatigue line versus the full recovery line. As long as you keep that in mind, you'll be able to consistently get progress. You just have to be patient and be really disciplined. It's going to be repetitive. It's going to be very simplistic, but it's going to be very, very effective. You're just going to have to choose. Do you want to be entertained by your training, or do you just want it to work and be as effective as possible in order to get you the results that you want? For all my Tribe by Noir members, you get full access to my exact training methodology, the way that I pursue things. As far as building muscle mass and strength, I have 2 means of doing this. One is going to be just with resistance bands and body weight. The other one is going to be with resistance bands and body weight and barbells. Basically, one is you don't need a gym at all, and one is one that you do in the gym. Now, the reason why I have one that you do in the gym is because you can bring your resistance bands to the gym and train, and this makes it really convenient. So basically, you can set up in a squat rack with a barbell and your resistance bands. So you don't have to wait for people to get off of training equipment. You don't have to wait for people to be done with their sets. You don't have to be tripping over people's dumbbells and all this type of stuff. You can do your whole entire workout right in the squat rack or wherever you choose to set up. So you can get in and out. So if your guideline is, hey, I'm in the gym for anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes doing my resistance training, well, you bring your bands. It's a really easy way to get that done without getting jammed up in a crowd. And then, of course, you know, you don't want to train in a gym at all. Maybe you got social anxiety. You don't like crowds. You don't want to pay the monthly bill. You can train with bodyweight resistance bands. You can train in your house, no matter whether you live in a really small apartment or you live in a big house. You can train in the park. Or you can take your bands on vacation. You can bring them to work meetings when you get on a plane. And, you know, let's say you're a person who flies around a lot, bring the gym with you. It eliminates all excuses, right? Because as long as you have your bands and you have a body, you can train no matter where you are, right? So there's two different approaches there. And then I have Tribe Flow, and it's all about improving the human abilities, mobility, flexibility, and stability, right? Basically, all the elements of movement hygiene. And this is something that you do on a daily basis, 7 days a week. And you can combine Tribe Flow with Tribe Flex or Tribe Solid. You can even alternate between Tribe Flex and Tribe Solid, which is the one that you do outside the gym or inside the gym. And then if you're a person who's trying to drop body fat, well, cardio is very easy. Just walk anywhere from 8 to 10,000 steps a day, 7 days a week, or at least that's what should be the goal, is, right? And then also you get access to my diet plan methodology, my high raw or fully raw diet plans. And I have a whole guide that goes along with that shows you how to calculate your calories, your macros, food pairing, food choice, all that kind of stuff. And there's also meal plan examples that you can then use. And then you just adjust the portion sizes and whatnot and make them tailored to whatever your needs are. And then lastly, in addition to that, we've got my fasting guide, where basically if you really want to drop body fat as quick as possible, well, most times the easiest and fastest way to do that is through fasting. And then your mindset and self-development, the 3 steps of self-actualization: discovery, assessment, and actualization. So there's a lot to go through for Tribe members. So if all this interests you, definitely hit the link in the description, join the community. And I'll see you on the other side for the next community group coaching call.